What I wanted to just say at the beginning in welcoming all of you and welcoming this initiative might sound a little dramatic, but it's really true. This is a matter of life and death that you're dealing with. Pysanky are a matter of life and death because they have become these pre-Christian symbols, and this genre has become associated with Easter, which is a question of life and death. And the pysanka itself combines kind of the power and beauty of the symbol, but also the great fragility and delicateness, of our life. It reflects the fragility that can lead to our death, but it is actually a sign of new life. An egg is something from which, new life emerges. And so I can recommend to everybody what you will be experiencing, because we in Paris, when I was still in Paris, had the wonderful opportunity to listen to, and more importantly, even see and experience what will be shared today. So I thank all the organizers, and I wish everybody a very blessed session. And of course, a very blessed Holy Week and Easter, whether it's now or in 4 weeks, if you're celebrating according to the old calendar. Slava Isusu Christu.
Bonsoir et bienvenue à tous pour cette soirée internationale autour de la culture ukrainienne. Welcome to all of you for this international event promoting Ukrainian culture. What can we talk about in Easter time? About Easter eggs, pysanky. And who can best talk about Easter eggs? The well-known artist and ethnographer Sofika Zielyk. Bonjour, Sofika.
Bonjour.
Sofika started writing pysanky on her mother's lap. Ever since, her whole life is pysanky. She dreams pysanky. She breathes pysanky. She writes pysanky. Pysanky of rare beauty and taste. And in her New York flat, they are all over the place. You can see that behind her also. Mrs. Zielyk is a native New Yorker. She holds a degree in art history from New York University. Writing pysanky is not just a hobby for her. She thoroughly knows about the ethnography of Ukrainian eggs. She has developed an exquisite artistic approach, as well as a very precise and knowledgeable approach of this ancient tradition. In 1992, Sofika was the first American of Ukrainian descent to exhibit her work in Ukraine, and the prestigious Association of Folk Artists of Ukraine recognizes her as one of their own. She has lectured and exhibited her work in well-known museums in the US and worldwide. Her pysanky are in the permanent collection of Ukrainian Museum in New York, for example, in America House in Kyiv, and even in the Pysanka Museum in Kolomia, the city with this huge big pysanka in Ukraine. She has published several books. Interviews and photographs of her pieces of art appear in a lot of magazines. 6 years ago, having received a Fulbright Scholar grant, Sofika spent a year in Kyiv doing research on, I cite, folk art as inspiration and muse for early 20th century artists of Ukraine. This is just a very brief overview of her activities. For more details, you will have to listen to her and go see her biography in the chat. You may also use the chat of this conference for your further questions. One last word. before the COVID, in the good old days when traveling was still allowed, you remember? Part of her precious collection was exhibited in Italy, in Rome, and in Paris. And this is where I had the privilege and great pleasure to get to know my friend Sofika. My own inculturation into Ukrainian traditions went through learning egg decorating. My own production of pysanky is not too bad for a French girl, but the real master is here with us today. I named Sofika. Please join me in welcoming Sofika Zielyk. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Дякую, and merci beaucoup, Ségolène. Thank you for the lovely words, and I hope I live up to the praise that you threw my way with this presentation. And now, if you can just bear with me for a few seconds, I think I did it. Does everybody see my pysanka slide on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, now I can begin. Thank you very much again. These days, everybody knows the word pysanka, even if they don't pronounce it correctly, or Ukrainian Easter egg. If you walk anywhere in large cities or small cities of the world, you see advertisements for exhibits or workshops. They are sold in stores, people buy them, they give them as gifts. They even have pysanka parties right before Easter. But very few people know the true origins of this tradition. And Vladika so eloquently touched upon this in his introduction. Some people are actually surprised, shocked, or even a little bit offended when I start talking about the pagan beginnings. And when people come up to me and say that to me, I basically have a response and I say one name. And for some reason, there it is. I say Metropolitan Ilarion Ohienko. Metropolitan Ilarion, the Metropolitan, was born in 1882. He was the Metropolitan of Rome and Podlasia when it was occupied by Poland. And then, as a lot of people did, because of the turbulent years of the first part of the 20th century, he had to flee his homeland and he emigrated to Canada, where he became the primate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Canada. He wrote many books. He was a scholar, he was a philologist, and he was a linguist, a historian, a folklorist. He was a Renaissance man. And one of my go-to books when I need any type of information is this: Дохристиянські вірування українського народу, The Pre-Christian Beliefs of the Ukrainian Nation. And very early on in the foreword, loose translation here, one cannot attain a deeper and wider understanding of true Christianity, including one's culture and literature, without having knowledge of the pre-Christian beliefs of one's ancestors. So in this presentation, I would like to take the Metropolitan's advice and start from the very beginning. And the very beginning is an egg. People all around the world, thousands of years ago, believed or made up many legends of how the world came to exist. They all vary a bit, but they're all basically the same. There was a creature, a woman, bird, and she laid the egg. The top part of the shell became the skies, the heavens, the bottom half, the earth, and the yolk became the sun. Now, there are different interpretations. Sometimes the membrane and the whites of the egg became the oceans or the clouds, but basically everything sprang from an egg. Now, our ancestors also revered the egg. They lived in harmony with nature. They lived surrounded by nature. They lived by the rhythm of nature, and everything they couldn't explain was explained by the spirits of nature. Now, the spirits soon became personified and pagan deities were born. One of the most important gods was the god of the sun. Without him, people couldn't exist. It warmed them, it warmed the earth, it made crops grow. Now, in the winter time, the days grew shorter, and people thought that the sun god was angry with them and was leaving them. So to bring him back, they had certain rituals. They sang spring songs, they had dances, but the most important ritual of all was the writing of the pysanka. Now, I would never presume to correct Vladika Boris, but in this case, I have to. We cannot paint pysanky. We write pysanky because the word pisate means to write, and pysanka means writing on an egg. Now, people chose as an egg as a gift to the sun to bring him back after a long winter for a variety of reasons. Number one, birds fly high in the air. They're much closer to the sun and the heavens than people were. So birds were solar creatures. Number two, people thought that when they held the egg in their hands, they can control or harness a little bit of power of the sun for themselves. Number three, when you break open the egg, you see the yolk. And with the yolk, people pay tribute to the sun. And the third very important reason of all, very often a rooster comes out of a chicken egg, and the rooster was the sun god's chosen creature. It was the only creature the sun god listened to, because when the rooster crows, the sun comes out. Now, the people didn't want just to give the sun a plain egg. They decorated it in symbols of tribute, or in the Ukrainian prosby, they asked the sun for some favors. So the most ancient symbol is the symbol of the sun, the 8-pointed star. And this design pays tribute to the Almighty. But there are, I can't seem to change my, there it goes. There are many symbols of the sun. Of course, the 8-pointed star. If you see I don't know if you can see my little arrow, but I'm pointing to the designs. The design in the lower left-hand corner, you can see it's obviously the sun. The design on the green, the swastika, or by it, the 3-spoke solar wheel shows the journey of the sun from east to west. And of course, the swastika now has a very bad reputation, but its origins is Sanskrit. Any kind of round circle that is red is the power of the sun, stars, as well as in the egg that is on the far right, a cross equal on all 4 sides. Another deity, she was a female, she was a goddess. She was called Mokosh, but in the Pisantha world, she's known as the Berehenya. The verb berehte means to protect. So the Berehenya was the protector of the family, the goddess of childbirth, goddess. She made sure that everything was okay with the family. And she's always portrayed with 1, 2, 3 pairs of arms up. She is asking for rain. The Berehenya, and I'm sorry, I'm having problems. If you can see here, the swirl up on top is the Berehenya's head and 2 arms. If you look sideways, there is a serpent-like head and 2 arms. But the Berehenya had a dual personality. She could give life, but she could take it away. She was a yin-yang sort of thing. And very often you see her standing on a serpent, on evil. And this symbolizes the goodness of the Berehenya conquering the evil. Another god, which is my favorite, is called Veles. He was the god of cattle. And at that time, having cattle meant prosperity. And he was also the god of poetry and music. His symbol is a circle with 1, 2, 3 or more bands. And with that eye, he looked into the fields and forests to make sure that animals were being reborn. He is shown all over in designs, sometimes very prominently, but sometimes he is almost hidden, as in the egg on the upper left-hand corner. The earliest eggs were just randomly placed symbols. It was not important to have straight lines or symmetry. In this case, this is the rooster, which we know is very special. He calls out the sun. So we have the rooster, we have the symbol of the sun, we have the symbol of the berejena in the bottom part, and we also have a pine branch. There are different interpretations of the pine branch. It could be everlasting health, because a pine branch never dies, or some ethnographers think that that is the symbol of the god of vegetation that made sure that all plant life is reborn after a long winter. Now, eggs in old pagan times were made only by women and only in the dead of night, so nobody can see what the pisankarka was doing, and they wouldn't be able to cast an evil eye on the design. If that happened, the sun god would not grant them the wish. So very often, a design, especially an animal design, was reconstructed and only parts of the animal was shown so that nobody knew what was happening. In this case, these three designs are called the rooster, but really you wouldn't be able to tell except for the rooster's combs. The horse, very important symbol, a solar symbol. You see, the sun god had a son and he was a horse. And it was the horse's job to take his father across the sky from east to west, just like Greek mythology. So the horse was very important. And I have never seen a traditional pysanka design without a little symbol of the sun. And you can see all the stars and swastikas all around the horse. The deer, also very important, symbolizes strength and prosperity. There is a legend that the god of the underworld stole the sun and brought it down to his kingdom. Everybody was too scared to come and rescue the sun. The only creature that was courageous enough to do this was the deer. And he went into the darkness of the kingdom and brought back the sun on his antlers. And if you can see up on top, there is a border with crosses on equal sides, symbols of the sun. So the deer is always represented with the symbol of the sun. I'm sorry, I live in New York and there's a lot of racket, so I think you hear somebody talking outside.
Yeah.
But sorry, it's New York. This are birds. Birds are happy. They're harbingers of spring. They're just happiness. Chicks, very important, symbolizes fertility. It was very important to have many children in those days to work on the farm, or children died when they were born. Flowers symbolize happiness and spring. The meander. I believe that this is one of Vladika Boris's favorite designs. All the lines are connected. There's no beginning or no end. You have no idea where you started and where you finished. And this design symbolizes eternity. There's a legend that says that if an evil spirit enters your home, he'll become trapped in these lines, but he'll never come out because there's no end. It symbolizes eternity, and your house will be evil spirit free. The 40 triangles. The design is called 40 triangles, but there are actually 48 triangles in this design. With every triangle, you got a wish from the sun god, and the three angles in a triangle represent either earth, air, and fire, or the magic three of birth, life, and death. Infants died when they were born, and there was only birth and death. So to have a long life, there was the magic three. There are also rules, who to give what type of egg. One with a lot of white was usually given to a young person because their life was like a blank page, not yet written on. An egg with a lot of dark colors or a very complicated design was given to an older person because their page was already written on. A young boy could also get a deer or a horse for strength and prosperity. An older person, something with a pine branch, or a sick person, something for a pine branch. For health, a little girl would get flowers for happiness. A young married woman would get a chick for fertility. Now, this went on for years and years. There are so many symbols in the pre-Christian world. But something very important happened in the 10th century AD, in 988. The ruler of the empire, Kyiv Rus, Volodymyr Veliky, decided for various reasons that he wanted to convert his people to Christianity. But there was a problem with that. The pagan gods, the rituals, were so rooted in people's minds that they rebelled. People in the big cities, well, it was a little easier for them to convert. But the villagers had a very hard time. Even the word pagan comes from the Latin, which means village. So pagans are villagers. They're people who were not baptized. Now, the Christian church went to war with this. They tried to root out all the customs and all the traditions, but they were not successful. Still, in the 15th century, this is 500 years after the acceptance of Christianity, an official church document was put out urging people to renounce their earthly gods. But what happened? People continued with their pagan traditions as long as they started with the Christian traditions, and eventually the two merged. You would actually be surprised how many pagan traditions we have in our culture today, and even in our church practices. But with the pysanka was sort of rearranged, and the symbols had double meanings. The fish, which in pagan times symbolized abundance or good harvest, became the growing church. Our old friend, the 40 triangles, which are actually divided into 48 triangles. Well, each triangle now became the Holy Trinity, but the word 40 is much easier to explain in Christian terms. The 40 days Christ is spent in the desert, the 40 martyrs, and the 40 days of Lent. Even the earth goddess, the Berehenia, with her arms outstretched, asking for rain, was transformed from the most important goddess in the pantheon of our pagan ancestors to the most important female in the Christian religion. And if you ever go to the capital city of Kyiv in Ukraine, you will see one of the oldest mosaics, and the Virgin Mary is portrayed with her hands up. Some ethnographers actually think this was done on purpose so the people would have an easier tradition from paganism to Christianity. The sun, equal on all four sides, which represented the sun, also became the Christian cross because the horizontal part went up in time and it was no longer equal on all four sides. The only symbol that I know of that was added to the depictions in the pysanka is the church. Now, eggs are fragile, but they're not as fragile as people think. They can actually take a beating. However, accidents do happen. And this slide I included just to show you that these are hollowed out eggs. In reality, the eggs had to be full. They could not be blown out. Not even that. Pysanka had to be done on fertilized eggs. If you blew out the inside, you would kill the life and you would get rid of the image of the sun. Even in the Hutsul region, it was a big no-no to give somebody an egg without the yolk inside. If one was given to a young woman, she would become barren. If an egg that was empty was given to a small child, their growth would be stunted. Or if an egg would be given to a sick person, that person would die. So you had to keep the egg inside. Blowing out the eggshell, it's something that started in the 20th century. Now, there are many legends associated with the origins of the pysanka. One pagan legend states that someplace in the Carpathian Mountains, there is an evil monster chained up in the hills someplace. Each year, he sends his spies into the world to see if people are making pysanky. If people are making the eggs, the spies come back and tighten the monster's chains. But if this tradition is no longer kept up, the spies don't come back, the chains become looser, the monster will come out, and it will be the end of the world. So people, as Vladika Boris said, had to make the eggs in order for the world to exist. And I always found it very interesting that the fate of the world rested on women's shoulders, because women were the only ones that were allowed to create pysanky. Now, my favorite Christian legend states that Simon helped Christ carry the cross. Before he could do so, he put down a basket of eggs that he was carrying to the marketplace. Upon coming back, as a reward, the eggs turned a bright red color. Now, Simon was so startled by this that he dropped the basket, and the eggs rolled down the hill to the Virgin Mary, who was praying at her son's cross. And as she prayed, she cried, and the eggs fell down her cheeks onto the bright red eggs, creating beautiful designs. Now, this also explains, this is the Christian explanation, why the earliest eggs were on a red background. The pagan explanation that red was the color of the sun god and the color of happiness and joy. And I think the practical explanation is that the dyes were made out of roots, berries, flowers, and red was an easy dye to achieve. Clients sometimes come to me and say, please show me the most traditional pysanka with the most traditional Ukrainian colors. That doesn't exist. The only colors which I can say are sort of traditional are perhaps the colors of the flag, which is the blue and gold. But each section, each oblast of Ukraine had their particular style of decorating the egg and their particular colors. For example, the Kursk region. Now, it's a region in Russia, but long ago it was part of Ukraine. And you could tell that the designs are similar, yet different. They all belong together. The Kyiv region. When I say the region, I don't mean the capital city of Kyiv itself. I mean the region that's composed of many cities and many villages. And you can see that these are very similar, and they come from the Holubyatin city. Pidlasha, it's in the northwest. These are eggs from the Pidlasha area, but we can even pinpoint it better. The top eggs, the reds with the swirls, are from the region of Holubyatin. No, I'm sorry. I sometimes mix up things. This is from the region of Bilsk. Holubyatin was Kyiv. And the two eggs from the bottom are from the Pidlasha area of Dorogochin. Everybody knows the Hutsul eggs. It's the egg in the upper side of the slide. They are intricate. The colors are predominantly yellow, orange, and red. Sometimes they have animals, but they are very complex designs. And that's what we are known for now in the pysanka world. But few people know that the eggs on the bottom slide are also traditional Hutzul designs. They are just not that well known. Even Hutzul designs have a lot of blue in them. This is from the area of Podila. It's quite a large area that stretches from the west to the east. And this is from the Ternopil area. They are very similar, and they all represent the pagan earth goddess. If you look closely, you can see the head and the arms in various ways. But this is also from the area of Podila, but eastern Podila. And this is from the village of Surja. And people are amazed that pink and green are traditional designs. Now, in my opinion, the symbols are much more important than the colors. Dyes were made out of roots and berries, as I said, and passed down from mother to daughter. They were kept in secret. The designs were passed down, the incantations and prayers that also passed down before you actually were able to create the pysanka, and the recipe for dyes were passed down. But if maybe one year one flower didn't grow and you couldn't make a certain dye, or sometimes the eggshell doesn't catch the color well. So in my opinion, the colors were important, but not as important as the symbols. But white symbolized purity, red, color of the sun god and joy, which was very important. And some ethnographers, not many, think that in Christian times, it also symbolized the blood of Christ. But the black and white eggs were made for the souls of the departed. Now, all of this that I'm telling you right now was oral history. It was passed down from mother to daughter. The grandmother passed it down to her daughter. The daughter could not deviate from the designs. If she did, the sun god would not grant them the wish. That's why all these designs are saved till today. But in the 1850s, something very important happened in Europe. It was a revolution, and Ukraine was part of this revolution. It was called the Spring of Nations. People got a sense of an identity. They wanted to know where they came from, who their ancestors were. They basically wanted to know why they were who they are. And a good way to figure this out is going into the field and asking the villagers, because they were the ones that kept the traditions going. The pysanka was very important to ethnographers. Already in the 1870s, in very important archaeological conventions, there were papers given on the tradition of the pysanka. And this is what is called the Pysanka Bible in the pysanka world. 2,219 different designs from the Ukrainian lands that were part of the Russian Empire at that time are incorporated in this design. We know the region where the egg was made. Sometimes we can pinpoint the actual village, and sometimes we even know the name of the woman who actually made that egg. There were also these books that came out in Western Ukraine, but this is the most comprehensive. And these projects in the fields for ethnographers continued until in Eastern Ukraine till about the 1920s, when the beginning of the Soviet Union happened, and in Western Ukraine a little longer, up until World War II. During the communist era, the pysanka tradition was frowned upon because it was a religious tradition, and this tradition declined. Yes, there were a few villages in Western Ukraine that kept this up, but very little. However, this flourished in the diaspora. At the turn of the century, people started immigrating, and they brought with them their culture and traditions. But with time, they forgot why they were actually continuing traditions. So with Pisantha, women in the diaspora forgot about the symbolism and now concentrated on the artistry of the design. They created new designs based on the very intricate traditional Hutsul motifs. The emphasis was on the straightness of the lines, the symmetry. All gift shops, Ukrainian diaspora gift shops, sold these kind of papers or these kind of leaflets so that women would continue with the tradition. But you can see they're very different than the traditional ones that were documented by ethnographers. These are some examples of my diaspora designs. As you can see, the one on the right is the 8-pointed star, but it's much more elaborate. The cross is the Christian cross, and the birds are sitting on willows. People didn't create willows. They didn't write willows on traditional pysanky. It was the pine branch. So the pine branch was now the willow. And now these are some designs that I really like that have stories connected to them. This is a diaspora design. And there's a legend that says when Christ was on the cross, he wanted something to drink, but the soldiers only gave him vinegar. The bees heard this. They flew by and placed honey on Christ's lips so he would have a sweet taste. A very traditional pysanka design from the Hutsul region. 3 was a magical number, birth, life, and death. But any uneven number was also magical. In this case, there are 7 hoops. Now, this egg, a woman was supposed to give to her husband if she suspected, to put it delicately, if she suspected he had a roving eye. If this was the case, the hoops were supposed to come off the egg, come onto the husband, tie him up, and therefore he would be faithful. And I sell quite a lot of these eggs. This is from the Chernihiv area of Ukraine. This is a traditional design, and I call it a historical document because it actually is. This is a round circle with little rays going around it, and it's the symbol of the sun. But I never knew what that pie in the center was until I found it from one of the ethnographers that I was talking to. That is a symbol of an eclipse. It's documented in the Pysanka designs. That's why I call it a historical document. Again, these are throwbacks to the pagan earth goddess, the Berehenya. As you recall, she always had her arms up asking for rain. In time, the Berehenya changed and became a priest, which we see on the right side, and perhaps the priest's wife or a nun. One arm is outstretched asking for rain, but the priest even has an umbrella. So this is one of my favorite, and this is from the Pudilla area. This egg is called the vochi zube. There are a lot of eggs with flower-like designs that are called crow's necks, rabbit's ears, duck's feet. And it could be, as I said, that only parts of animals were drawn so that no one could cast an evil eye. But the ethnographer Mikhailo Skorik, the composer's father, Miroslav Skorik's father, has a different theory, and I agree with him. He thinks that the rabbit's ears and crow's feet and so on were names of medicinal herbs that were written on the eggs so the herbs would grow. And he even went farther because he discovered that in certain areas of Ukraine, the word wolf's teeth, vochi zube, is synonymous with dandelions. Medicine women use this name. So this is most probably not to protect a person against the wolf, which of course it is possible, but in my opinion, it is to have many dandelions for medicinal purposes. The only time a pysanka could be hollow was to make pysanka doves, holubci, not to be confused with holubci, because that's stuffed cabbage. But holubci were only made in the Hutsul and the Boyko region. The egg was blown out. The wings and the tail were made out of paper. In the Hutsul region, the beak was made out of wax, but in the Boyko region, where my mother is from, the beak was made out of paper. And these holubci were hung from beams in a house during Easter time, but to commemorate that the Holy Spirit came to Christ when he was born in the form of a dove. Now, up until time, we talked about traditional eggs, which come with a birth certificate. They were documented in the ethnographer's works. We know exactly where they came from. The second type of Easter eggs are the diaspora eggs, which were based on mostly Hutsul designs, but they no longer had the symbolism that we know of. And then there's quite a new phenomenon. It's called autorskie pysanki, and you can't even call them pysanki. I call them egg art. These are artists' pysanki. And this started, I would say, in the very late 20th century. I also paint ceramics. And the picture on the left is a little segment of my ceramic plate that I based on traditional motifs from the Kyiv region. I took those designs, that particular design, as my inspiration, and did it on a pysanka. That's a goose egg on the egg. Well, actually, I did a goose egg, not a pysanka, on the right. This is my plate of a Hutsul wedding scene. Hutsuls were very good at pottery making, and they portrayed everyday life with people. And I did a 9-part series called The Hutsul Wedding on goose eggs. You can see the wedding couple, then the svacha holding the korovai, the wedding bread, and the two on the bottom are two of the musicians from the wedding. The icon. This is the largest goose egg you can find. It's a double yolk Canadian jumbo goose egg. This egg was actually one that was on exhibit in my exhibit in Paris, in Vincennes. And this is one of my favorites. It's the Madonna and Child, but done in a very very peasant way, but I say that with the utmost respect for peasants. And this is my icon that I did after seeing a Picasso exhibit, and I think I was under the influence of Picasso at that time. When I was living in Kyiv, as Ségolène mentioned, I was researching how folk art influenced fine art in the early part of the 20th century. At that point, I became reacquainted, or sometimes even acquainted, with different artists. And I started projects. I started taking or borrowing the artistic style of certain artists and putting them on eggs and making pysanka in those styles. This is work of naive artist Maria Prebachenko, and she was very famous for portraying magical, mythical beasts. And these are some examples of my work on chicken eggs, portraying Maria Primachenko-like animals, beasts. Kazimir Malevich, known as the father of suprematism, but he painted in many, many different styles. And these are examples of the Malevich-like suprematist eggs. And these are examples of Malevich-type artistic works on eggs. And what's interesting about this series, I was creating this during the pandemic, during the lockdown. And Malevich had a way of painting men's beards very, very angle-like. But to me, they look like masks, and we were all wearing masks at that time. So all the men in my series are wearing masks instead of beards. I'm sure everybody knows how to create a pysanka, but just to review, these are the stages that one egg has to go through to become a finished product. You start off with a white egg or a brown egg. You have an instrument, a stylus, which is called a kistka. You scrape beeswax into the funnel of the kistka. You heat it up by the candle flame. Now, we only use beeswax because it turns dark when it's heated. And we apply wax to the areas of the egg you want to be white. The wax protects the color underneath. So when you dip the egg into the yellow dye, the shell changes, but not the part of the egg which is covered up with the wax. That will remain white. On the yellow shell, you wax the areas you want to be yellow. And again, the wax protects the color. You dip the egg into the next dye, which in this case, it's red, and you wax the areas you want to be red. Then you dip the egg into the last dye. In this case, it's black. You take out the egg, everything, the shell and the wax is black. You hold the egg by the candle flame, section by section, melt off the wax, and the colors show through. Now, each egg is made this way. There are no shortcuts. Believe me, I tried. There are no shortcuts. But besides being, we see this as a beautiful work of art, eggs had very important functions, especially during paganism. There was always a bowl with pysanky in a house, and every time a person went someplace, they would carry a pysanka with them to protect against evil. Pysanka shells were ground out and put in cattle feed so the cattle would be healthy. A pysanka would be rubbed on the hide of an animal so he would be healthy and have a long life. Pysanky were put in the four corners of the house when they were built, so the house would be evil spirit free. A pysanka with an eternity design was placed in a beehive, so there would be continuous honey. When a child died during the Easter season, a pysanka would be put in the coffin so that he would have something or she would have something to play with. When an unmarried girl died during the Easter season, people put a wreath of pysanky with a red background onto the coffin. You know, they also had to be, for example, if a pysanka broke and a holubet a pysanka dove could not be created by it, you couldn't just dispose of pysanka. You had to dispose of them properly. There were different ways, but one of the ways was burying the eggs in your garden. And actually, I did that one year, and I cannot tell you how wonderful my tomatoes came out. Now we know that that is because the eggshells contain calcium, and that's very important. But our ancestors believed that the pysanky were magic, and actually sometimes I tend to agree with them. So I can speak about pysanky for the next 3 hours, but I think you received an overview, and you can tell that pysanky are not just pretty little objects. They have a whole history connected with them. And I hope that you agree with Metropolitan Ilarion that you have to know absolutely everything about your past to know about and appreciate your present. And I leave you now with one of my favorite pictures. I took approximately 90 pysanky to a farm to take photos, and the chickens went crazy. It was if they were saying we want our eggs back, but no pysanky were harmed during this.